Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento. And in case you haven't heard all those metrics and stats out there about entrepreneurs and small businesses and our failure rates, well, we're going to address all of those here today because today's guest is very open about the fact that most businesses fail. But what I love about today's guest and fellow entrepreneur is that he also knows that success leaves clues, and we can actually study our industry, study our competitors, glean those insights from that data and set ourselves up for success. So let me introduce you to today's guest and fellow entrepreneur. His name is Chris Johnson. Chris is the founder and CEO of PeerView AI, where he is transforming how small businesses access data-driven insights. With a deep background in lending and payments, Chris combines hands-on expertise in credit underwriting with a keen understanding of the complexities of the U.S. small business landscape. Now with PeerView AI, he's bringing powerful market intelligence directly to small business owners, helping them level the playing field with data-driven decision making. No matter where you are in your business growth trajectory, I'm sure Chris is going to drop some metrics on us here today as well, but no matter where you are, it's so important that we have our finger on the pulse and some strategic insights driven by data in order to maximize our chances of success. So I'm personally very excited about this one. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Chris Johnson. All right, Chris, I am very excited that you're here with us in today's episode. First things first, welcome to the show.
Yeah, glad to go and be here.
Heck yes, you and I were talking a little off the air, fellow New Englanders. You've worked all up and down the East Coast. You're now in Texas. Take us beyond the bio. Who's Chris? What's that background? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Yeah, so I've always had a strong interest in both economics, but also kind of automation and data science and the ability to use data to make better decisions. And that's always been a kind of a natural fit with the economics background. I found my way kind of accidentally, somewhat intensely, into the space of small businesses, which are just intellectually to me very fascinating because small business data issues are a complete disaster. No two small businesses are the same. Small businesses don't really report data in any sort of consistent way. And so it's just this fascinating intellectual problem that also intersects really nicely with economic interest because, of course, we all know how strong and how important small businesses are to the overall economy. And so it's just this weird area that's incredibly important, but also very not necessarily misunderstood, but very difficult to go and get any accurate information about because of how messy and how confusing and how complicated the space is.
Yeah, Chris, I love the fact that you called out so early on that no two small businesses are the same. Here's the thing, my one gripe, and I'm excited for you to talk to listeners directly about this. I obviously hear from a lot of entrepreneurs, and my one gripe with a lot of things that I hear is they say, oh, well, I love that guest and I love that topic, but it wouldn't work for my business because this. And everyone convinces themselves so deeply that their business is so different, Chris, that nothing could possibly work for them and nobody else could possibly understand their pains and their struggles. You obviously make sense of both macro and micro data for a living. What's your take on that? Because we are all different, yet I would assume that there are some fundamentals and universal truths in business.
Yeah, and we'll get into a little bit of it soon enough, but that's kind of the inherent idea behind how I go and think about it, because no two businesses are alike. And even if you found a perfectly alike copy, there's always randomness, there's always chance, there's always luck, there's always things that are going to go and make it difficult to go and do an apples to apples comparison. But we know of ways of solving that in economics and science and all of these ways, which is you use benchmarks. You don't try to go and find one business that's exactly like yours. You find a variety of businesses that are as close as possible to yours. And then statistically, that will go and give you a very good and useful base to go and be able to understand what is going on with your business. In the same way, and it doesn't even, just apply to small businesses. There's no business in the world like IKEA. There's no business in the world like Amazon. There's no business in the world like a lot of these bigger corporations, but you're still able to make sense of them by going and looking at similar businesses to them and seeing how similar, a given impact will impact all of them equally to be able to go and tease out that kind of understanding. So the goal is not to find identical businesses. It's to go and find similar enough businesses in a big enough quantity to be able to go and get understanding.
Yeah, it's really, I know how intentional you are with your words, and I really appreciate the way that you talk about these things because it shows. And you called out these big businesses, IKEA, one of a kind, Amazon, certainly one of a kind. We see how many coffee shops try to emulate the Starbucks type of model and growth trajectory, some of the more regional brands especially. And I love the fact that you call those out. But one thing that you also said in there is you said randomness and luck. Those are, of course, factors in any success journey in anything, not just business, but in life. How much do those things play into it? When you talk about looking at data-driven insights, how much of it, because a lot of people will point at it, and we also have colloquially terms and phrases like, it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. How do we account for all of this stuff in the metrics and the data?
Yeah, there's two different ways. One is we tend to attribute a lot to randomness and luck of just things that we don't know. And that's one of the aspects that I go and tackle at PeerView is trying to increase the total amount of stuff that you do know so you're not surprised by things and attribute them to luck or randomness in the future. If you're going and opening up a new coffee store in a place that no one likes coffee, that's not bad luck. That was just misinformation, right? But then on the other hand, no one can really predict the future. The future is always going to go and have chaotic elements. There's always going to be changes in people's tastes. There's going to be changes in populations. There's going to be, black swan events like COVID or different kind of political environments or different fads that will come up, like, the cupcake fad a couple of years ago. So like those things could be considered much more on the luck thing. But that's, as I said, that's the separation that I try to make. There's a lot of things that because we don't have the ability to know today, we think that's luck, but it's simply knowable, but not accessible to you as a current entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's such an important distinction. It's fun coming from you, knowing that you're an economics and finance geek as well, because obviously in the stock market, we always talk about past performance isn't necessarily an indicator of future performance. And we can't predict the stock market. We can have educated insights into those trends and analyses. I love, you called out the cupcake industry. And yeah, when I lived in Los Angeles, that felt like such an unexpected thing that happened, especially in a health conscious city like LA and obviously the region of Southern California. All of a sudden, cupcakes are all the rage, and there's cupcake ATMs that people are going to in the middle of the night. And Chris, speaking about those types of things that seemingly pop up, how much of our job as business owners, as entrepreneurs and innovators, how much of our job is about making sense of what's happening right now and maybe in the recent history versus trying to say, hey, I'm going to go beyond the metrics. I'm going to go beyond what's actually currently happening and try to create something new for the future?
Yeah, there's two aspects of that. So one, I actually had this conversation a bit ago when I was pointing out that I kind of do this competitive benchmarking to someone who had a new business. And she was like, well, I don't want to go and be average to my peers. But then she thought about it a moment, but it was like, but it would be really helpful to know that if my peers are going and doing well, that means I can do even better, right? You want to go and start from that base of like, no one is striving to be average. But you want to go and make sure that if you do exceptionally well at what you do and bring a unique offering, that you're going to go and be incredibly successful and not simply break even, right? That's heartbreaking, that you go and do a fantastic job of execution, but you just chose the wrong market, you chose the wrong location, you chose the wrong timing. And as a result, you're going and coming into the cupcake fad when everyone else is over cupcakes and it's oversaturated. Or you're coming into the current pickleball fad when now everyone is moving on to, whatever the next sport after pickleball, that will be the fascination. But then the second thing is maybe you do want to do something truly unique and truly special. And that's great too. Like, I won't be able to go and help those people as much if you're going and setting brand new ground and doing something that is completely different and weird. But it's helpful to be intentional about that, right? You don't want to go and do something, you don't want to open up a McDonald's franchise and just treat it the same as if you're going and creating, the Segway, right? Those are two radically different choices that you're making, and you should go into those with different levels of expectations about market research, competitive knowledge, and so on.
Yeah, so well said, especially because, Chris, I'll be honest with you, part of what was really enticing when our team came across your business and why we reached out and we're so excited to have you here on the show is that something we hear from a lot of newer business owners is everyone wants to use data. We all know the power of data, but a lot of new business owners think to themselves, I don't have data just yet. I don't have an Amazon-sized customer database to look for those trends and make those strategic marketing and sales and conversion decisions that the bigger companies have. What I love about PeerView AI is you look at industries, you look at similar competitors. Talk to us about that approach and the fact that we don't need our own internal data. We can leverage analyses and data that's out there already.
Yeah, and this is really where the AI component becomes incredibly powerful, because another way of thinking about what I do is I'm effectively doing consulting as a service. By taking the sorts of data analyses that before were incredibly manually intensive and required someone to sit down there and try to look up every single business and try to figure out, is this a good competitor? Is this a good benchmark? Even a simple coffee shop, they could have a catering service, they could have a food truck, they could have multiple locations, they could be embedded inside a different corporation and not really accessible to the general public. There's so many little judgment calls you have to make that if you want to go and do the types of market and competitor research that people really want, it became extraordinarily expensive because you needed to go and pay someone to go and sit down, look through all this data, and then you're talking about a report that's tens of thousands of dollars in order to figure out. But AI is a wonderful way of flipping this. AI can handle those judgment calls, and they can go and surface the logic and the reasoning. So that way it's very quick and easy for a human like myself to simply sit down and go and be able to say yes or no very quickly and turn what was before something that required, hours and hours and hours of grunt work and then a very small amount of manual, thinking and expertise at the end, into something that now all that grunt work can be automated and people can go and get something that is incredibly tailored to exactly what they're looking for an incredibly cheap price, because they only have to go and pay for that small amount of expertise that was coming in at the end. So I think it's a transformative way to use AI, not to go and reduce cost and to automate people's jobs and stuff like that, but to go and create a service that before wasn't available because it just never made sense from a cost benefit perspective.
Yeah, Chris, I'll tell you what, it's fun hearing you talk about these things because obviously I've seen your business and I love how even on your website you have an example competitor report where I can get insights into my competitors and what their revenue figures probably look like, what their business model looks like, what those revenue streams look like. I've seen all of that, but for listeners who are hearing you talking about benchmarking and finding these competitors and how AI can do that legwork for us, introduce us directly to PeerView AI for the listeners who haven't seen it just yet.
Yeah. So there's two main things people talk about. We've been talking, of course, about competitors and peer grouping and benchmarking, of course, all along. And then the second aspect is revenue. There's a variety of different market research and public data sets and AI companies coming out now that are helping with aspects of market research, but they're generally relying on more publicly available types of data, or they're relying on foot traffic data or web traffic data, stuff like that. That's, one or two steps removed from what most business owners are most concerned about, which is how much money are they making? Well, if you know revenue, that gives you an incredibly powerful tool because revenue tends to be the thing that everything else branches off of. Oddly enough, it's not profit because profit is subject to all sorts of sometimes tax decisions, sometimes organizational decisions, sometimes growth and investment decisions. So profit's not a very useful metric, but revenue becomes the thing that you can go and hang your hat on and understand, okay, how is the external world impacting my revenue numbers? How is this new market going to go and do on customer demand by looking at the revenue there? So revenue becomes that key thing where you can start to hang all of your other decisions on. And by combining revenue with your competitors' revenue as well, you can then start to go and understand your business model very effectively in a very tailored way without needing, to what you said earlier, Brian, without needing the big corporation size of you have thousands of locations and now you can use that own internal data in order to do that analysis. You can instead leverage the wisdom of the crowds by looking at all of your competitors, putting them together in kind of a nice spreadsheet and be able to go and figure out what is actually happening to my business. and I say, put it together in a spreadsheet. I do that for you. I kind of pull those insights and send it to you. So that way you can kind of get what you're looking for and have a wide variety of backing in order to go and understand exactly what you're seeing.
Yeah, Chris, hearing you talk about that, I know a lot of listeners' ears are going to perk up because it's probably the one thing that every entrepreneur wants to know about every other entrepreneur around them is how much revenue are you making and where do I measure along that way? Because as you alluded to much earlier on in our conversation today, it at least gives you a roadmap of possibilities. It shows you that average number. I like to think that, well, if the average person is doing this, I can put in above average effort and above average ideas, and I know at least how much that baseline is that I can squeeze out of this idea, this business model. So knowing that so many listeners' ears are going to be perking up at those revenue numbers, the inevitable question that a lot of them are probably yelling at their speakers and saying, Brian, ask Chris this question, is how do you get at those revenue numbers? How do we start to make sense and make those educated guesses or data-driven informing? How do we figure out how much revenue our competitors are making, our industry has available to us? I'd love to hear how you're getting at that data.
Yeah. So my background, of course, in small business lending, this was the big project that I was going and working on for much of the last decade is how to go and understand revenue of businesses that have not yet come to us, right? Because a business that's coming into the process, then you can kind of ask them, hey, hand over all of your financial statements, do the open banking or Plaid connection, and we'll pull as much stuff as possible. But there's a lot of use cases in marketing, in fraud, in customer management, where you want to go and have access to those revenue numbers without them giving you that kind of permission. And so the clever workaround was actually inspired by American Express, which, American Express card members swipe their American Express cards at businesses all over the country. And there's been rumors for a while that I've never actually validated, and I don't think American Express has ever come out, that American Express uses those card swipes at their business locations to understand how well that business is doing and use that as a proxy of revenue that they can go and back into a variety of things. And so that's the insight that underlies how I've approached gathering that revenue data, which is looking not at the businesses themselves, but looking at customers who are spending at that business and working to find data sources that have access to that customer spend data, stripped of any, customer specific information for privacy reasons, but then matched up to business locations. So that way you can go and understand, hey, we're going and looking at how customer spend behavior is actually happening here. We don't have to worry that the business is going to be lying to us because it's not their data, right? It's that one step removed. You're looking at external data sources, so it can be fraudulently manufactured in the same way. Although fraudsters are always clever and creative, so I wouldn't rule that out in the future. And then that becomes the basis for PeerView AI, is pulling together data sources that have access to that transactional data and matching it to the right business in order to be able to go and get those insights. The downside of it is, there's some areas where it's not going to be full coverage. There's a lot of B2B businesses that are completely invisible from this sort of metrics. But the businesses that it does work, it's pretty fantastic in terms of what you can go and get out of it.
Yeah, I love that, Chris, because I'll tell you what my ears hear is I'm just like, you can get at these numbers because that's what you do. And obviously you have made a living out of this. And that is exactly what PeerView AI does. So it makes sense that most of us feel like we have no idea how to get our competitors or our industry's revenue numbers because there are so many considerations. And I love the fact that your financial background and working at big banks gives you these insights because you think about it differently than the rest of us would. And on that topic, what it's fun for me to ask you this question, also knowing how much you love economics, is that how much does the macro stuff play into this? Because we're talking about some industry specific trends, some industry specific data, but at the same time, the economy on a macro level is happening. And you and I are recording this at a time where nobody quite knows what's going to happen with the economy just next. How much does the macroeconomic conditions factor into our micro decisions?
Yeah, and that's the thing that, oddly enough, I think most people only have access to macro level information. And so currently entrepreneurs are doing most of their research off of what their perception of the macro level view is, and then a little bit of the ability to do local level research and kind of sit there at if they're opening a coffee shop, they go to the competitor's coffee shop and buy coffees and talk to the baristas and stuff like that. But most of the information they have available to do market research is going to be macro level. And that's useful, but once again, we see it's not very useful because what often matters, and this is the theme for a lot of these businesses, is density, right? If you hear that cupcakes are the new fad, opening up that first cupcake shop is going to be incredibly useful. Opening up the 20th cupcake shop in the same town is not going to be useful. Same way with the macroeconomic trends. The macroeconomic trends are going to go and put headwinds on a variety of businesses, but some areas are going to fare very well because they're going to be more insulated for various reasons, because there's fewer competition, more demand, or other dynamics to what's going on there, whereas others are going to get completely devastated. So from my perspective, the macro level stuff increases the variability in the outcomes, and therefore increases the importance of being able to get really good micro level data. Whereas when you have a more stable macro environment, then everything, I think, becomes a little bit not safer necessarily. Studying a new business or growing your business is always going to be risky, but at least a little bit more predictability on that front.
All right. You talk about the riskiness of starting a new business. It's very prominent on your website, PeerViewAI.com, which we'll talk about at the end, but it's listed right there. The problem: 80% of new businesses fail. Chris, we've all heard all of these stats from our local chambers of commerce, from the Small Business Administration. We all know that chances are most businesses are going to succeed. Having looked at all of the data and all of the industries that you look at on a daily basis, why are so many businesses failing? What is it that is not setting them up for success? What are they doing? What are the market conditions? Why are most businesses not succeeding long term?
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, starting a new business is a very long process to do, right? I mean, we're not talking about you decide to quit your job one day and then you set up a new business the next day. You can do that, for example, with tech startups, but for the most part, people who want to go and open up kind of more Main Street businesses, a hair salon, a bowling alley, an ice cream shop, a coffee shop, something like that, they're talking about a multiple month, multiple year type journey, and it's a lot of discovery along the way. And so when we say that 80% of businesses fail within 5 years, there's a big portion of them that really never get to the starting line because they realize during that process that maybe this isn't for them, or that it's going to be more pain, more hassle, whatever theory they had isn't going to go and work out. So, it's not tragedy that a lot of those businesses don't make it to the starting line. It's lost opportunity, but they're not devastated. The ones that I tend to go and focus on more, and the other stats I list later is about competitive pressure, customer demand, and stuff like that. Those are the ones that I'm much more concerned about trying to go and reach, and that's why I use a little bit of that scare tactics to get people's attention, because if you're going and starting a business that requires a real estate loan and you're taking out SBA loan in order to do so, and you're hiring a bunch of people and they're quitting their jobs to start at your new job, and you're dipping into your retirement funds and you're quitting your own job, like there's all of these financial commitments that then become really scary if your business doesn't succeed. And most of those businesses that don't succeed are going to fail for a variety of problems, but a big chunk of those problems could be solved with more money, right? If more customers were showing up, if they were making more money from day one, if they had a business plan that kind of was already accounting for what they should reasonably be expecting to see, they would be in a much better situation. And I think what we go and see in talking to various people and talking to some of these nonprofits and chambers that are working with people is that a lot of them are coming in blind and they're expecting things to be better than they should be from day one. And so they already get underwater at the very beginning. And that becomes a very difficult struggle for them to ever go and kind of get above water. So that's a little bit why those are the people I try to focus on and reaching, to try to make sure that if they have an idea for a new business, it's a donut shop or a coffee shop or a hair salon or something like that, that they're locating themselves in a market and they're building a business plan with the right expectations. That way they're going to go and be in a situation that you said earlier, that the extraordinary effort that they put in is going to go and give them better than expected outcomes. And they're going to have a positive feedback loop working in their favor, as opposed to coming in there and having everything kind of feel like it's going bad from day one because they're not getting the sales, they're not getting the customers, they have to reduce prices, and then all of a sudden they're feeling like they're already underwater and just being pushed deeper and deeper.
Yeah, Chris, you called out so many different types of businesses there, and I think it's important because in today's day and age, we all think about kind of the sexier businesses, all the AI companies that are sprouting up, all the SaaS agencies of years past. I feel like, within the past 5 years, everybody wants to build a SaaS company, or an iPhone app was what all the rage was before them. But you call out Main Street businesses, and I love that, especially as someone who lives in a city. I love walking down to my local corner and having a local coffee shop. I love the idea of boring businesses, all the laundromats, all the car washes that we all need. My mom was a hairdresser, and so knowing that's a service that we all need, there's no way around getting your hair cut. And so what's your take on where we're going? Obviously, here we are well into 2025. Everyone's looking at what those longer term trends are going to be with technology, but what's your take on those businesses that are still going to be here 10 years from now? What do those look like?
Yeah, so I mean, you have, whether it's the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, talking about how Harvard MBAs are now being really pumped and excited to go and buy their own plumbing businesses, because you have this entrepreneurship through acquisition movement that's really been taking steam, with people going and buying all these baby boomer type businesses in an attempt to, maybe not get rich quickly, but, become a CEO, become an owner of these profitable businesses. So there is a lot of interest, definitely, on these boring businesses from private equity, from MBAs, and so on. And there's definitely a lot of interest still. A lot of people want to go into business because they love doing what they're doing and they want to start up a business. And a lot of the tools in the past were limited more to the franchise market, which has actually been an area I've been digging into a lot, because a franchise will say, hey, you want to go and open up a barbecue shop? We will sign up with us, pay us some money, and we'll give you a blueprint for success there. And that's, one path that's been going on. But the future path, I think, is going to be more companies like mine that are able to provide these sorts of business owners and entrepreneurs, whether they're buying or whether they're setting up a new business, very tailored services to what they're looking for, because of the fact that AI and technology is going to make it much cheaper and much more profitable for them to go and start serving that bottom segment. The flip of it, of course, and that's why I'm studying where I am, is that you still need these people to go and have confidence to go and start up businesses, and they need to choose the right businesses in the right markets in order to be successful. And being able to push more of those people kind of, and I said before, a lot of people fail not because they took out a massive loan and it collapsed, but because they never get to the starting line. The ability to use some of the data and insights that I'm generating will hopefully get more and more people to that starting line and over that edge in terms of them going and having more confidence to start a business, because they'll have all of these other tools and services down the road to be able to help them succeed. And they'll be able to hopefully, if I do my job right, choose the right markets that they'll be able to start in a place that's already kind of well set up for their success.
Yes, that right there, Chris. That's why I'm a big fan of the work that you're doing, because it's important. And I'm obviously super biased. Listeners have to hear me say this every single week, but I firmly believe that entrepreneurs not only push industries forward and technology and innovation forward, but we move communities forward. We move society forward on the whole. And the fact that you're out there empowering people, setting them up for success so they can in turn impact their own industries, it's the ripple effect. And that's the most beautiful thing about entrepreneurship. So huge kudos to you in the work that you're doing. I'm going to ask you this last question. I ask it at the end of every episode, but I want you to answer it with your entrepreneur's hat on, because not only are you a subject matter expert in all the things we've talked about, but you're also one of us. You're also a fellow entrepreneur. And so with that in mind, what's the one piece of advice that you want to leave listeners with, knowing that we're being listened to by both entrepreneurs, the ones who haven't gotten to that start line just yet, as well as entrepreneurs, the ones who are doing everything they can to keep this infinite game going, staying in business, staying serving people? What's your one piece of advice that you want to give to people wherever they are in their growth journey?
Yeah, no, I would say talking to the customers is always going to be the most valuable thing, especially if you're in the entrepreneur phase where you have some ideas of your product and you're tinkering around with some ideas. Figuring out how to go and get yourself in front of the people who are going to go and be your future customers as quickly as possible, and just start those conversations is going to be incredibly valuable, because, I don't think I have pivoted my company in the same way that when you typically talk about tech pivots, but I have made so many minor and small adjustments as I've been talking to more and more people about exactly what they're looking for, what resonates with them, what messaging works, what exactly they want from the value side. And that's the type of stuff that you really can only go and get if you're having so many of those conversations and talking to enough people that you start to understand not what they're saying to you necessarily, because people don't necessarily know what they want, but being able to go and understand the themes and then use that to talk to new customers and be able to go and get that to start to echo back to you in a more coherent and consistent way. So definitely just, if you're an entrepreneur, wherever you are in the growth journey, I don't think you should ever stop talking to people.
Yes, so important, and it's so aligned with your mission and the value that you bring to the marketplace, Chris. I love the fact that ties in so nicely with all the things we talked about today. And of course, your business, PeerView AI, which before I kick it back to you to drop those links on us, I just want to tell listeners what I really appreciate about your website is your website itself gives value. You talked about providing consulting as a service and how AI makes it more scalable and certainly more cost effective for people to leverage those types of services. I love the fact that you've got statistics on your website. You've got tables that straight up show here's what traditional market research will give you, here's what it provides, here's what it misses, and here's how PeerView AI plugs those gaps. So much good stuff that you're putting out into the world. For listeners who want to go deeper, Chris, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Yeah, so the website is www.peerviewai.com. There's links on that website to go and be able to get a hold of me and set up a quick consulting session to see what you're looking for. There's a variety of different things that I can go and do. As I said, I focus mostly on either new or growing businesses that want to explore a new market, because that tends to go and be the biggest ask and consistent ask. But the power of being able to go and understand what your peer group is doing to be able to do benchmarking is pretty limitless, I think. And I'm really happy to go down any of those rabbit holes with you to see what I can do and to offer.
Yes, so listeners, the website is super easy to remember, peerviewai.com. That's peer, P-E-E-R, peerviewai.com. But what's even easier is just to look at the show notes wherever it is that you're tuning into today's episode and click right on through, because of course we're dropping that link down below. We're also linking to Chris's personal LinkedIn, so if you want to reach out to him personally and continue that conversation and talk about your business, your industry, or what's even cool is, even if it's just your idea, if you're still in that entrepreneur phase, have the powers of Chris at your fingertips. You've heard how knowledgeable he is here in today's episode, so definitely check those links out down below in the show notes. Otherwise, Chris, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
All right, thank you so much. Great for having me.